Hello and welcome to Bebop Scales. This is chapter 6 where we take our knowledge about how to use half steps in 2/5 dominant bebop scales and in major bebop scales. Count how long a particular passage we play is and uh, transition from one chord, in this case a 5 chord, into a 1 chord where we have to switch bebop scales. So there's a couple parts to this that are relevant. We can practice where we put on the metronome and we play 4 measures in time, and the object is to not mess up the time and keep track of where you are. And that is really important way to practice, and one way that's valuable. But we can also practice where we go slow and we count while we play, and we keep track of what beat we're on when we're playing, and then we can stop on that beat and maybe change the notes, figure out better notes we want to play, and then come back on that beat and come up with a new passage or change the notes or try a different idea. And then we can make sure that we can play those ideas in time. So we can either just practice playing in time, and that's very valuable, or we can count while we're playing and figure out different options that we can use. So I have patterns up over here that we'll talk about some of these, but the main thing I want you to understand about what we're doing here is how to practice by me talking about it and playing some things for you. So what we want to do is we want to say, okay, well, maybe I'm just going to play my arpeggio loop examples. I'm going to practice my arpeggio loop, and then I'm going to go to the major chord and play arpeggio loop, and I won't play scale loops, or then later I'll just practice scale loops, or then I'll practice combining them. But one of the thing that I like my students to do is go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they play. And we figure out whether they move to the 1 chord when the 1 chord happened and they played their ideas in time and it made sense or it didn't. And the way we start to guarantee that reality from happening is by counting how long we play and stopping on beat 4, and then examining beat 4. How are we going to go from 4 to the end of 4 to enter the new chord on a note that's going to help us describe that chord as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So the simplest way I know to do that, well, the simplest way would be to start on beat 3 and go 3 and 4 and then stop. But if realistically, to try to hear a 2-measure phrase, if we start on beat 3 of the first measure and we go 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, then we look at that beat 4, and then we play 4 and 1 and then finish the major chord idea. So I'm just going to play a minor 7th chord up from the tonic and a bebop scale down. The minor 7th chord is going to be on beat 3, and then I'm going to be counting 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2. So when I do that, when I start on my D on a D minor chord, 4 falls on a D. So I want to go to a C major chord. So I want to think about a lot of different things I could do. One thing I could do is I could go D down to B and then play my C major chord arpeggio. 1, 2. Or I could do that same thing, but instead of going D to C, I mean D to B to C, I could go D, D flat to C. Or I could take the D and go D, D flat, C, and then continue down the scale. One of the easiest ways to deal with beat 4 is to think of beat 4 as belonging to the new chord. So if I play D and then D flat and C, C is on the downbeat, and then I can go C, B, A flat, G, and I'm kind of spelling the 6-9 chord starting on beat 4, and that would sound like this: 1, 2. And all those with a rhythm section in the band are going to be completely harmonically accurate and sound correct. So this time I'm going to start on D again, and I'm going to play a 5-note arpeggio up to an E, and then I'm going to come down, and I'm again going to start on beat 2, and I'm going to be counting and looking for where beat 4 is. 1, 2. Now that note is one of the most important notes to talk about that I ended on. I ended on the tonic of a dominant chord on beat 4. So if I play G on beat 4 of a G7 chord, if it was beat 3 or 2 or was early in the measure, I would always go G, F sharp, F, because I'm trying to continue the sound of the dominant chord. But if I'm going to a major chord on beat 1, I don't really want to enter that C major chord on going G, G flat, F, and enter it on F. I want to go G, F, E, and enter it on E. Or I can do something else. But the first thing that you're going to do is, if you get to the tonic of a dominant on beat 4, is you're going to leave the half step out that's in the dominant bebop scale and just enter the major scale. And so that would sound like this: 1, 2. For example. So I could get to that G, and I could decide, well, I'm going to go up to an A, and then I'm going to enter the major chord on B, and then I'm going to come down chromatically, because Charlie Parker might do that, and I want to sound like him. 1, 2. Just like Bird. Okay, so the point is that I want you to take from this is you're wanting to count while you play, and if you restrict yourself to just playing eighth notes, it makes it easier. 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Yada da yada da yada da. And then you're able to look at beat 4 and practice different alternatives for getting from beat 4 into beat 1, where we're actually taking the sound of the G7 chord in this case and turning it into the sound of the C major chord. So over here in my examples, here I start on beat 3, I play down the scale, I just come all the way down the scale and I enter the major chord on the major 7th, and I play up the major arpeggio, and that lick sounds completely fine. Okay, there we have it. Starting on an upbeat is always a good idea. In this case, I start on an E going to F, and that's kind of like a leading tone to the 3rd of the minor chord. Oh, I noticed that I have E minor A7 here, and it should be D minor G7. It's one of those instances where you say, uh-oh, people look at this, they're going to think I'm really stupid. They might be right, so we'll leave it there, but believe me, it's supposed to be D minor G7. I just have some music in finale, and I take it and I transpose it. It's the cause of all my mistakes with all my ensembles. It's like taking finale parts and converting from here, and you don't want to know. I don't want to know. I don't worry about it. In any event, so this is D minor G7, even though it says E minor A7, and I'm starting on upbeat, and this E to the F is kind of like a leading tone. One thing that we like to do is add a C sharp on our D minor chords, and usually that will be a C sharp leading to a D. This is that exact case we just talked about where I get to a G on beat 4, and instead of going G, F sharp, F, I go G, F, E to enter the C major chord, not D. Enter the C major chord on the 3rd. And so this passage sounds like 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. In this next passage, I get to the G on the G7, and notice it's right this time. I get to the G on beat 3, so I go ahead and I play what I usually do during the G7 chord. I go G, G flat, F. And then I've got an F on beat 4, and I could do a lot of things. I could go back up to a G here and then down to an E natural. In this case, I'm going to do enclosure to the 3rd from that F on beat 4. I'm going to treat it as an upper and lower neighbor tone to the 3rd of the major chord. And this is kind of a bebop sounding thing. Sounds like this. 1, 2. Brilliant. Okay, so now this last line is indicative of where we're going to go when I get around to putting up lessons 7, 8, 9, 10, blah, blah, blah. The next group of lessons is going to be about the flat 9 dominant bebop scale, which is not based on a major scale. It's actually based on a harmonic minor scale. All that to come. And instead of doing 2, 5, 1 major, it'll be half diminished dominant flat 9 tonic minor. And so it's kind of like 2, 5, 1s in a minor key instead of a major key. And there's different set of notes that are played. There's a lot of similarities. On a dominant chord, we're always going to go in a G7, whether it was a flat 9 or not. We're always going to get to G on the downbeat. We're always going to go G, F sharp, F. But we're going to use the flat 9 on the flat 9 chord. Imagine that. So in this last example, I use the idea of the major 7th of the minor chord, the C sharp, as a lower neighbor tone to the lower neighbor tone to the D, and then upper neighbor tone to the E, and then down the scale. And then I play another altered note, and more as we go through more and more sessions, we'll be talking about making our playing even more chromatic. And so I call these upgrades when I add more chromaticism for the purposes of melodic and harmonic sophistication. And so this passage sounds like this. When I look at it, I'm scared I'm going to be able to do it. But if I do it, it'll sound like this. Something like that. And so that uses more chromatic passing tones, more melodic embellishments, as I call them, in other chapters that we'll talk about. And it's things you can read in the book. The book is based on going through explaining the 2, 5, 1 and why we use bebop scales, dominant bebop scales, major bebop scales, flat 9 bebop scales, melodic embellishments. That's where we play a lot of notes that are chromatic notes that aren't directly related to the scale, but related to embellishing notes, like arpeggio around chord tones would be a melodic embellishment. And so melodic embellishments is chapter 4 of the Bebop Scales book. And then chapter 5 is making up bebop scales, putting half steps in different spots. The amount of things we can do with bebop scales is not really limited. The amount of things you can do with blues licks, every blues lick that can be played has not been played, and way far from every bebop scale that could be played has not been played. And so we talk about ways to come up with your own ideas with Bebop Scales. So those are all good reasons to think further about that and to pay attention to the Bebop channel to get bad trumpet playing to inspire you to practice hard so you don't grow up to be like me. Okay, thank you kindly for being here, and I look forward to communicating with you again.